So I came north. Something told me, come to the Kenton area today to look for what I want to do for my next video. And I wanted to find something really big. I want to find something, really superb, like impossible to miss, massive to cover in my next video. But I got here and frankly, I'm not finding anything that interesting out here. It's weird. I felt like, if I could just look over my shoulder and there would be like what I'm looking for right there. Nope. Well, guess I just have to keep looking. Paul Bunyan, a massive figure of folklore dating back to the late 19th century, best known for being a figure of massive stature, with his superhuman strength, especially with an axe as a lumberjack, a cap on his head, thick dark beard, red and white checkered shirt, and massive black boots, accompanied by his companion Babe the Blue Ox. His origin is believed to have come from the culture among American lumber camps in the eastern portion of the United States, stretching from the Midwest in places like Minnesota and Wisconsin, all the way up to Maine and even into Canada. Several towns have staked the claim to being the birthplace of this towering mythical figure. Gradually, his lore spread from men of the forest to the written word, popping up periodically prior to the 1910s before literary pieces on the figure began to increase. Paul Bunyan would become a household name used by businesses to promote their products. Paul Bunyan is a name that everyone knows, even if they don't know a lot about him. And another representation of this mammoth of a human came in the form of statues. This is the neighborhood of Kenton in North Portland, and the resting place of a 31-foot tall character with a wide smile on his face and an axe in his hands. One may pass by, and even if they've seen it before, they may wonder why there's a huge statue of Paul Bunyan in a North Portland neighborhood. Well, let's bounce back a little bit to 1959 and the 100-year anniversary of Oregon becoming a state. A perfect opportunity for celebration and self-promotion. Starting February 14th, 1959, 100 years to the day after Oregon's birth, and the state took off on its centennial celebration. This included events happening in towns all over the state. Here's a copy from the Oregonian of a complete schedule of events for the whole centennial, broken down by counties. A lot was happening, but the hallmark event of the year was a 100-day-long event called the Oregon Centennial Exposition and International Trade Fair, lasting from June 10th to September 17th. This gathering included presentations from many businesses from all over the state, gathered in the Portland Expo Center complex. Along with this, in an exposition setting covering over 60 acres, there was an amusement park, international garden, and an adventureland space where one could find a beer garden, sawmill, and there was even a real popular location called the Frontier Village that was set up like an Old West town. There were also celebrity appearances including Roy Rogers, Lawrence Welk, and Harry Belafonte. and even Vice President Richard Nixon stopped by. And the role of master of the opening ceremonies was assumed by actor Raymond Burr, best known at the time for his role of Perry Mason on television. Altogether, approximately 1.5 million people visited this Centennial Expo. Not as successful as the Lewis and Clark Expo more than 50 years earlier, but by no means a failure. And, as mentioned, this major expo happened in the vicinity of the Portland Expo Center, still standing to the far north end of town, a spot that today is actually a part of the neighborhood of Kenton. And here's where the purpose of this massive Paul Bunyan comes into play. The Kenton area first saw development at the end of the 1800s, but did not take off as a town until the Swift Meatpacking Company, or Swift and Company, established a large plant there in the latter part of the first decade of the 1900s. This began a boom within the Kenton area as it was becoming one of the most prime locations of livestock in the country. The town, in name only as by this time it had been annexed into Portland, prospered well with a charming main drag along Denver Avenue, previously known by the name of Derby. But by the late 1940s, in post-World War II America, business at Swift and Company was not booming like it once was. And even the site where the Expo Center is now, previously the site of a livestock exposition going back to the 20s, was no longer functioning in this capacity. In fact, during 1942, the complex had been converted into a temporary holding area for Japanese Americans as they waited to be sent off to internment camps. And this place would later become the Expo Center, more focused on the types of things it is used for today. Swift and Company's workforce had been cut in half, and the local economy was struggling going into the 50s. The flood that destroyed the town of Vanport right across the Columbia Slough moved thousands of people out of the area, not helping the situation. Kenton needed some help. And come 1959, a massive summertime Centennial Exposition had set up shop literally right up the road. An event prepped to bring in 1.5 million visitors. Kenton was straight down what was then Denver Avenue, but is now a stretch interchangeably mixed with Interstate Avenue and Denver from the site of the expo, meaning lots and lots of traffic in the area, and a potential opportunity for the local economy. They needed something big, eye-catching, impossible to miss. And then that something could be a guiding presence leading visitors into town, into Kenton. And that's where we got our Paul Bunyan. The idea to construct something that would lead people into the heart of the neighborhood was established by the Kenton Businessmen's Club, but the concept of a massive statue in the likeness of Paul Bunyan came down to workers at a small machine shop once standing at Denver Avenue and Willis Boulevard. Known as the Kenton Machine Works, run by a Victor A. Nelson, he had the help of his son, also named Victor, and other workers in getting the project off the ground. And why Paul Bunyan, of all characters? Well, Victor, the son, would say in 2001, at the time, Oregon was the leading timber state, and the Kenton Business Association wanted people traveling the route to see something that represented the lumber industry. And he wasn't kidding. Even a novice knows about the Portland area's background in the timber industry. It wasn't called the clearing once upon a time for nothing. So a Paul Bunyan type really made sense. Beyond the timber connection, there were multiple Oregon writers who helped spread the lore of this larger-than-life figure. One of these people was Ida Virginia Turney, who produced the what is considered first work on Paul Bunyan that was specifically written for children, put out in 1916. And another Oregon writer, James Stevens, started writing on him in the 1920s, perhaps inspired by his own past experience in the timber industry. And the idea of producing a large Paul Bunyan statue was also something rapidly coming into popularity. In fact, Minnesota beat Oregon to the punch by 1 year, building their own Bunyan statue for their 100-year centennial. And the town of Bangor, Maine would also build a statue of the world's largest lumberjack in 1959 as Portland was building their own. I'll be getting back to that. In terms of the early stages of going from nothing to this, the first work was to be put together within the Kenton Machine Works. But before then, Victor R. Nelson, the son, just to be distinct, asked his wife Betty to peruse children's books about Mr. Bunyan for possible design ideas. A January 1959 article said this statue was only going to be 20 feet tall, which may have been a misprint, but also might suggest folks were thinking big but decided to go bigger. Bigger to the tune of 11 extra feet. Overall, the construction work, from the first construction of the wire frame that made up the, quote, skeleton for this statue, up to the very end, were conducted by union workers in their various fields. As Victor R. Nelson would describe it in 2000, their ironwork welded I-beams and channel irons to a steel base and covered that skeleton with wire mesh. Piece by piece, the iron frame was erected and taken from the shop across Denver Avenue to the triangular southeast corner of where Denver and Interstate meet. Compiled, this skeleton was lifted up to a standing position at its final resting place through the use of a crane. Upright and held in place with scaffolding, the next phase was able to begin, the lathing and plastering work, which is funny. I've never talked about plaster work in my many years studying Portland history, but this is my second time referencing it in 2 weeks, referring back to my video on the movie building in Portland's Elliott neighborhood. This detailed plaster work on the Bunyan statue was done over the course of 2 weekends, May 16th and 17th, and then the following weekend of May 23rd and 24th. Once the work was done, the statue was immediately lauded as the world's biggest statue of Paul Bunyan. Perhaps a little extra to pull attention towards the statue's significance. It's actually cool to actually show who all was involved, because it was the Kenton Businessmen's Club that really helped push this. But yeah, under original constructors, you can see all these groups that were involved. And you see the Kenton Machine Works, which that was kind of where a lot of the early work originated, was with the owner of that place. But they brought in workers to help them put the interior steel together, and then a lot of other people got involved. So it was a pretty big project. They needed a lot of help from a lot of people. So there's 2 plaques located here. The older one is from one of the restoration projects that they did. It started in 1985. Looks like it was finished in 1986 by the Columbia Lions Club, Boy Scout troops. Yeah, I read in an article that the Boy Scouts were involved. Special thanks to the merchants and citizens of the Kenton District, without whom we would have not succeeded. Thank you all. Yeah, he probably needed a little restoration work. By then he'd been up for almost 30 years. And then down here is the plaque for him being added
to the National Register of Historic Places, which I think was finalized in 2009. I thought it says built circa 1959, when it's known full well that it was made during the spring of 1959. I don't know, maybe the national people didn't know that.
And you look at the detail on this thing, which is something that's discussed, but you don't really understand it unless you see it up close. You've got the, I don't know what it's called, but the wrapping around the side of the shoe almost, kind of similar to, where's my shoe? To like what this is. And then, all shoes have got a heel to the back. This one's also got a heel to the back, and this, even his shoelaces, they're not painted on. Like, we'll get down to a certain level, you can see they're actually like created and added on. The attention to detail was crazy, but then again, it was unionized workers. From those that helped in the machine shop to putting the iron skeleton, if you can call it that, together, to the people that came out and put all this around it. They really paid a lot of attention to detail. And they built this nice support. They kind of created this whole little gathering area for people to go to, hang out with Bunyan, hear some of his stories. He's got his handkerchief in his pocket. He's got his mullet. And yeah, they built this for him. Something to help him stand tall. Not that he needs any help with that. And they put this little brick wall in back. I mean, some of this may have been here before it was moved, but off the top of my head, I'm not certain. But we've got a few benches here, 4 in all. And we've got a sign leading you into historic Kenton. And that's what I think is so cool, is that, the main, like, historic commercial Kenton district is right down Denver Avenue here. And so, they got the sign here. They're trying to, attract attention from people coming off the street here. And they've got Paul Bunyan right here as this kind of like welcoming party. Hey, everybody, welcome to historic Kenton, right this way. And which is so funny, because that was pretty much his original purpose, was Kenton was looking to, revive itself, get whatever help it could. And its businessmen were like, oh, this big, massive expo, something we haven't seen in a very long time, is going to get set up right down the road there, and a whole bunch of people are going to be coming through here. How about we have something here that'll really grab people's attention and hopefully help lure them further into town? So they said nearby there were 4 blue, what was the word? Yeah, so these associate with Paul Bunyan's mythical companion. And the way it was described, I thought they were over there next to him, so I thought maybe they'd been removed, but they're just across Denver Avenue. And you can see, because they're like horseshoe shaped, and there's 4 of them for, I'm assuming the 4 legs of his companion. Lone Ranger had a companion. Paul Bunyan's got to have one too. The impressive work done in this venture really shows, especially considering the fact that, having been around since 1959, it still stands in wonderful condition, built to last even though it was not originally intended to. I'll get back to that. What I really love is the description given of Paul Bunyan's overall appearance in Historic Places documentation, where he is noted for his mullet hairstyle, conspicuous ski jump nose, exaggerated cheekbones, I can identify with that, modest smile, flesh-colored lips, striking white teeth, and enormous ears. And his eyes, while on the subject, used to have black around them, something that no longer exists on him today. Dedication of this statue happened on June 6, 1959, only 4 days before the launch of the exposition, with the ceremony led by Portland Mayor Terry Shrunk and members of the Rose Festival Junior Court. And things just took off from there. So right there you got Paul Bunyan welcoming you into town off of Interstate. I mean, again, it still lists it even on Google Maps as Interstate/Denver Avenue from here on out, but the signs here just say Interstate, so you know what, for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to say this continues as Interstate. It actually makes more sense to me that way anyway. So people coming from the north, traveling south, would see this as they rolled into town. Coming off of, again, we're just going with Interstate. Here's Interstate, runs next to the Max line. And you continue on down Interstate here, Portland Expo Center's that way. Technically we passed through where Vanport was, and then to the north of that is where the Expo Center is located, and that was the primary location for the main exposition for the Centennial that was held here. So it was held literally straight down this road or avenue, and so you had a lot of traffic. Now this is before I-5 was built, so when people came across the river from Washington on the Interstate Bridge, it wasn't I-5, it crossed the river and then it forked Union Avenue, now MLK went off that way, and then Interstate continued on this way. So anybody crossing the river coming this way, or anybody going north to get to the expo, they were going to be coming through here. So there was a lot of traffic for that expo, and the people knew it. And so to prepare for that, for all the, well, noise for the moment, but for all that traffic, they would come down Interstate, and then right around the corner there was big Paul Bunyan awaiting people. And roadside attractions were more popular then. He was a big statue. Like, nowadays people see it and they might think it's corny, I guess depending on who you are. I mean, you know, in today's society, but back in 1959, people would see that and that would really catch the eye. That was a really appealing kind of thing to have up. And that's what you'd see. All this traffic coming up and down Interstate Avenue. Interstate Avenue got some good wear and tear in 1959. But Kenton's claim of having the tallest Paul Bunyan statue around was destined to encounter a little controversy. This is where I reference back to that statue erected in Bangor, Maine, also in 1959, and also 31 feet tall. However, they placed their statue on a 6-foot pedestal, giving it a little extra height. And it's funny, around the time that Portland's Paul Bunyan here got finished, there was another one in Bangor, Maine created, and they just both happened to conveniently be reported as being 31 feet tall. And Bangor, they put their Paul Bunyan on a 6-foot tall pedestal. So they were like, oh, well, he's 37 feet tall, so he's taller than yours. And of course, Portland, you know, up here in Kenton, they were trying to boast this as the largest Paul Bunyan in the world. And one of the guys that was part of the town here was like, well, if you want to get real fickle about it, technically the tassel, they describe the tassel on top of his hat, which has got to be that little red ball, actually makes him a little bit taller than 31 feet. So, haha, we gotcha. We have the tallest one. That was the argument they were putting forward. So that tassel's important. Or that, you know, to me it's just a ball. Whatever the case of who really staked the claim to the tallest Paul Bunyan in this case, eventually there would be others that would surpass both of them. While it simply doesn't count in terms of height, a statue in Ackley, Minnesota, I hope I'm saying that right, showing a Paul Bunyan crouched down was argued to likely be about 60 feet tall if the statue was standing. But in terms of straight height, a 49-foot tall representation of Paul Bunyan, along with his ox companion, were built for the Tree of Mystery attraction in the Redwood National Park, that I just happened to pay a visit to back in 2016. Never thinking I'd be referencing back to that here, almost a decade later. Interestingly enough, something that is not often discussed is how effective the establishment and placement of this statue actually was for the neighborhood and its economy. It was likely to be short-lived either way, with lots of visitors being from out of town. It certainly had some effect, but even then, the plan was to take the statue down once the Centennial celebration was over. It would have served its purpose by then. But in the realm of Kenton as a whole, its struggles would continue, capitalized by the construction of the I-5 freeway through North Portland. This freeway would take over traffic going across the Interstate Bridge into Washington, cutting off lots of traffic that once would have crossed this bridge and traveled south on Denver/Interstate into Kenton. This added to the decline in the area as well as the decline of Interstate Avenue as a main route in the city. Like many areas on into the 70s, Kenton continued to have problems, but upon my first visit here in 2016, having no idea what to expect, I was pleasantly surprised by the charming community I stumbled onto. A community that, again, now includes lands to the north, including the old Vanport site and the location of the Portland Expo Center. And Paul Bunyan would manage to stay in existence beyond 1959. While it briefly sat in limbo, the neighborhood was approached by state officials who asked that it be converted into the location of a tourist info booth, which actually sounds kind of cool, and it makes a lot of sense with the statue's status as a place trying to attract outsiders to the area. And it would become this tourist info booth, perhaps saving it from extermination. It would continue serving in this capacity for a few years until I-5 construction was done and this booth was relocated north to the Jansen Beach area. This left Paul Bunyan without an immediate purpose, but perhaps it didn't need one. While built at the start of its decline, this statue of Paul Bunyan served as a great example of a roadside attraction, which is pretty cool as most items that fit as such attractions were often along open highways, some of which were in far more rural locations. The concept of roadside attractions really peaked in the 1950s, correlating with a post-war boom in the auto market, with its slow decline beginning in the 1960s, right after Paul's statue was erected. Other suggested roadside-type attractions in the Portland area have included the Sandy Jug and the one-time Steigerwald Dairy in their milk bottle-shaped building. As the years went on and the struggles grew in the Kenton area, the statue remained, albeit not necessarily well taken care of. One of the earliest detailed jobs done on it to keep it looking clean happened in 1985. It also appears that at this time he was repainted. This view of Paul in 1984 shows him looking still how he originally did, and for the most part how he looks today. But in this 1985 picture, we can see his face looked a little more stoic, I guess, and his formerly checkered shirt had been repainted as a solid red button-up shirt with suspenders. His boots at this time were painted completely black. And also, with however the situation looked on site, Victor R. Nelson, who continued to work near the statue, did his best to keep the grounds there clean himself. Historical documentation states there was further work done on the statue in 1999, with an article from 2009 stating restoration work there was about to start, and it was the first work done in 20 years, suggesting work was done on Paul in 1989 as well. And by the end of the 90s, there were new changes in store, that being plans for the establishing of a new TriMet Max train line, today's Yellow Line. This line was set to run down Interstate Avenue, clear through Kenton, and ending at the Expo Center. A key aspect of this project was that the new line was going to take up space along Interstate, with it running to the east side of the avenue upon reaching the Kenton commercial district. This required Interstate in this area to be moved slightly south, putting it in the path of this behemoth statue. This meant Paul would have to be moved, which, understandably, was a bit of a thorn in the side to some locals. Some thought the yellow line would help revitalize local businesses, while others felt it would just jam up traffic, with some calling the line the planned train to nowhere. There was even a joke going around that maybe they should just run the Max line between Paul Bunyan's legs.
So, this intersection used to go out, or at least this edge here used to go out a little further before the Max station was put in here. So I had to kind of bump everything back this way a little bit because this was closer to the actual intersection itself. You can see in old pictures it's pretty close. Granted, it's not that far away now, but all of this used to be further that way. So it was moved 59 feet towards me. So it used to be, guesstimate, I mean, it was kind of right out here. Kind of, it'd be a little bit in the way nowadays. And you can even see, because the building behind it here, looks like it's a Wells Fargo now, it's a lot further away in old pictures. Like, it almost looks like it could be about not a block away, but maybe half a block away. And now, like, literally it's just here to there.
When the time finally came for the move in February 2002, there was at least a slight element of charm to it. Victor R. Nelson, who would pass away just 2 years later, mentioned that there was a hook located within the statue under Paul's cap that was used by the crane to carry it to its original spot back in 1959. He felt the hook was still strong enough to be used, and thus relocating Paul could have been done in a similar way to how it had originally been done. As Paul was shifted 59 feet to the south, an ornamental construction vest was put on him, almost making it look like he was part of the crew doing the work of moving, of himself. How effective the Max line was in reviving the area is debatable depending on who you ask, but I can say my first time visiting there with my wife was a planned trip to the Delta Park area, but when we saw the Paul Bunyan statue, we decided to get off. We then got sidetracked by walking through Kenton and taking in all of its charms, so it worked on us. And how bad things really got in Kenton into the 70s and on into the 80s also seems to depend on who you ask. Many locals have said it wasn't all that bad, and that they just got swept up in the stigma of being a North Portland neighborhood during the wrong time. I still remember as a little kid at the end of the 80s and into the 90s, everyone talking about how you needed to stay out of North Portland. A lot of genuine concerns, mixed with a lot of racism, creating the idea that every street corner in these parts was dripping with fear and crime. Kenton was struggling, sure, but with time and dedication, things turned in a better direction. It's a place whose history on its own I hope to cover in more detail someday. And no matter what the circumstances were at a given time or even a given day, Paul was right there keeping an eye on the neighborhood, while at the same time welcoming its visitors. And the last 20 years have not been uneventful. In fact, in 2008, the owner of a North Carolina-based log house company named Tom Vesey offered and pursued diligently to buy Kenton's Paul Bunyan. Vesey was a lover of Bunyan lore and by this time had already purchased other statues in his likeness. He even promised to keep it in Oregon, as he planned on opening a sales center between Portland and Eugene, where he planned on keeping it. But the voice of the neighborhood was a resounding no. There's just some things, regardless what they are, that you don't let get taken away from you. The offer was never seriously considered, nor do I believe any offers in the future would be, especially considering what else happened in 2008. A nomination for this piece of work to be put on the National Register of Historic Places. This would be the first roadside attraction piece of architecture in Oregon to be given such a nomination. And with Victor R. Nelson's recent passing just a few years earlier, his widow Betty felt it would be a great way to honor his memory, and even his father Victor A., for that matter, who owned the shop where the work began. And come 2009, Paul would officially be added to that register. 2009 also saw work begin on a $12,000 effort to restore the statue and repaint it, the project being a part of a larger effort to revitalize the Kenton area as a whole. Unfortunately, due to what was called a chemical incompatibility in the paint job, the statue would find itself in need of a repainting after just a couple years. A Paint Paul campaign was started to raise funds, and fortunately in 2017, he was repainted once again. Due to the attention to detail, along with the skill of those who created it, aside from the exterior needing work every so often as it is exposed to the elements, the statue has managed to stay in great shape despite its age. And he's still here, doing what he's always done, welcoming visitors to Kenton. Back in 2000, Victor R. Nelson was quoted to say, "The statue was supposed to be there only about 6 months, but it stayed 40 years. I think that if you come back in another 40 years, it'd still be here." I sure hope he's right.